Oh, now it's working. And I make a big noise. Oh, so I got that part to work. So we're getting there. We just need a couple more people. I told them that the time is now.
For those joining us on the webinar, we'll be resuming in just a couple of minutes. Okay, I'm pleased to introduce our next speaker. Georgene Geary is a registered professional engineer in Georgia and has her bachelor's in civil engineering from the University of Illinois. Champaign-Urbana and a master's from Georgia Tech in Atlanta. She retired from GDOT at the end of 2014, where she had spent most of her career involved in materials, pavements, and research. She started her own consulting business in 2014, GGfGA Engineering, to keep her busy this summer and to fill her nights and weekends while she pursues her doctorate full-time at Georgia Tech, which she will start this fall. I'm pleased to welcome Georgene, and following Georgene, we'll be hearing from another speaker speaking about asset management. After the end of both presentations, we'll have some time for discussion.
Thank you, Liz. As Elise mentioned, I'm a long time worked for the Georgia DOT. I started out as a geotechnical engineer, and in that area, I worked with underground storage tanks, hazardous waste sites, and erosion control. And then I went on to construction and did a lot more erosion control, and I kind of became the environmental liaison between the district and the main office on all types of environmental issues, endangered species, hazardous waste sites, archaeological digs, those type of things. So I've been involved in environment all my career, but I have never really worked in the environmental area per se. Now, so personally, I drive a hybrid, and I recycle. I separate, cans and bottles and all that kind of thing. Even though, we don't have curbside recycling, my better half has to load those things up in the back of his truck and take them to a recycling center. So I'm doing a little bit of my piece, at least I'm trying. But we had a climate change presentation at Georgia DOT some years ago, and I was in the audience, and I couldn't help to ask them at the end of the presentation, why do you guys use references from Wikipedia and wikis if you're trying to convince us that climate change is real? So I think I'm a realist too. If you're going to talk about things that are real, you've got to have real data. So I want to talk to you a little bit about sustainability and reality. And then my focus, most of my career has been in materials, so I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the material pieces and pavement. There's some new thing that just came out on sustainable pavement that I want to share with y'all. And then I've got a couple examples on these are concepts according to Georgene as a materials engineer in sustainable materials. And then I'll take those back to reality. Now, I think we've had some of the speakers already talk about how sustainability can be subjective. Now, from a materials practitioner's point of view, I have had salespeople come in and say everything that they sell is sustainable. Not all of them, but there are a few. And so, if you can't really fit it in the context, it's hard to say no, it's not. And then, we talked about the local conditions and how it's context sensitive. And I thought it was good that it was pointed out. Oh. Hello? Testing? Sorry, I forgot about you guys out on the web. And I think it was pointed out about, where we're going to get to be sustainable, how long does it take? Especially in the pavement world, we design pavements for 20 years. In Georgia, we have interstate pavements that have been there since they were originally built in the 1950s. And so it can take a long time to tell if something is really sustainable. But in the public sector, some people want results in 4 years. And you know who those are. Now, we had a good discussion about this, and so I'm not going to really go on this slide very long, but I just had to ask this question, being the elephant in the room, are all these green rating programs really sustainable? And there's, we heard about Invest and Green Lights. Green Roads, I actually had the opportunity or the pleasure to moderate one of the first sessions at TRB that Steve Munch had done on presenting green roads. And so I've known about green roads for a long time, but I don't know it in detail that some of y'all probably do. Do know a little bit about green life, and I'll tell you about that in a second. But all these other programs, they're just, some of them are just kind of words for somebody that's in a different field. And it becomes a little overwhelming. And so I think we had a good discussion about that. There's an issue, but don't know if we have the answer yet. Now, there are some comparisons out there on the rating system. You saw some of that already. Georgia DOT actually did a research project with the Georgia Transportation Institute on analysis of green road rating systems. Now, it was published in 2013, but most of it was actually done like 2011, 2012. And so INVEST was actually still in beta at the time when I was done. And the result of that was they did recommend a green light program. I think we changed about half of the actual the details, but is it me running against this? Ooh. Try that. Sorry, I tend to dance a little. I might have done that. Okay. Now, I mentioned that they recommended a green light system. And one of the big things, if you've been involved in TRB, you know that a big thing about TRB is implementation. Very important, and getting research implemented is really hard. Being a research engineer for the last 14 years, it can be hard. We still have not implemented that research. But the manager assigned it to the group that does value engineering. And so it's kind of going to become part of the value engineering process to implement that. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out. And maybe when they see more of INVEST, they may look at INVEST too. I found this when I was preparing for this and just kind of finding out what was going on in the sustainability area. I found this report that was done by another UTC. It's the Multi-Planes Consortium. They're out west. And they looked at a framework of how you would, for a particular DOT, and they looked at 4 different DOTs, Colorado, Wyoming, Utah, and South Dakota. And they identified kind of a framework of how to get the DOT involved on what type of system works best for them. And it was interesting that they recommended INVEST for Colorado and Wyoming, but they recommended green lights for South Dakota. And then at the time, they were still kind of undecided. And then I saw in your presentation that Utah has actually used INVEST, so they may have gone.
Okay, so can people hear us better now? Hopefully that's going to work. There's less static. I'm okay.
Good, maybe it wasn't me. Computers.
All right. Okay. At least a lot of people are anxious about this. Yeah. Probably not the speaker. Somebody can hear very well. So I'm sorry to interrupt everything. I don't know why it's different. I think if we're learning that Georgene is
Yeah, can you mute, mute everyone? I recently spent an hour conference call, spending a half hour trying to get the computer to work. I know how that goes. I'll just leave it there. All right, well, there are comparisons out there. We've talked about them. I think people will still be making comparisons. Now I want to talk a little bit about materials and GHG, greenhouse gas emissions, LCA, life cycle assessments, LCCA, life cycle cost analysis. Now, you could go to any of the industry websites, down some of the major industries, asphalt, concrete, even steel has a sustainability website. Actually, I found a sign manufacturer that had a sustainability website. So they all understand the importance of sustainability and how that is to the bottom line. And they all have their own greenhouse gas calculators. And they all have their own view on LCAs. Now, on the life cycle cost analysis, we do have a tool that, thanks to Federal Highway, called Real Cost, which is a life cycle cost analysis tool that has been used. I know we started using it over 10 years ago at Georgia DOT. We kind of actually helped them develop it a little bit better. And this is kind of the standard for life cycle cost analysis in pavements, in pavement evaluations. Now, though, if you go to the asphalt industry's website, you go to the concrete industry's website, they each have a primer on how to use real cost. Because there's different inputs that you can use that actually can benefit one industry or the other. And so you kind of got to be careful on the inputs and what goes in. And in the materials world, reduce, reuse, recycle, those are simple terms. Sometimes keeping it simple is better. Now, in the pavement area and recycling area especially, there are guidelines out there and some that have just come out. So R65, I'm starting from the bottom on this slide, it's a standard to look at new recycled materials and what you should think about and what you should do before you would accept a new recycled material. And what type of performance measures would you want to make sure that you had set up for it? I was actually involved in putting that in an AASHTO format back in 2006. And this came from the Recycled Materials Resource Center. It's a pooled fund of different states that are looking at new ways to recycle. So they're still together. There's still University of Wisconsin is now leading that pooled fund. Now, I found this research results digest on sustainable pavement maintenance that was actually put out in 2012, and it was based on a synthesis. And a synthesis is just gathering what information is available at the time. And this document was just a little bit before its time, because one of the major conclusions was we need more research in this area. There's just not enough information on sustainable pavement maintenance. Now, NCHRP Synthesis 435, if you're involved in recycling at all, this should be on your desk or on your hard drive. It's 8 volumes of all sorts of information on recycled materials and byproducts. It is a synthesis also, so even though it came out in 2013, it's already old. In synthesis terms, as soon as they come out, they're old. But it's the most comprehensive information on recycling in the state DOTs today. And the author did a really great job on this. It's a large amount of work. Just came out this year, 2015, is towards sustainable pavement systems. And this was put together by a Federal Highway Sustainable Pavement Technical Working Group. And this thing took a couple of years in the making. I was a friend of the TWG, and I didn't know that if you're a consultant you could be a friend too, so I just found out that was the case, so I'm going to refriend them, or they're going to refriend me, I guess. This document is pretty amazing. Now this is what is in the document. It covers sustainable pavements from beginning to end. It has all the information. It's over 450 pages. So it is a reference document. Even though I'm retired, I haven't been able to sit and read the whole thing. But so you know practitioners are not going to. But it's a reference document. It's a document so when you need to find out about something, you would go to that area. Now, that's supposed to be a kitchen sink there. That's a faucet. That's another thing you lose when you leave and you retire from the DOT, the people. I had some great people. I had a great administrative assistant that would have been able to find me a great kitchen sink. And Tracy, I missed you. But this was the best I could find out on the web. So attended the kitchen sink. Now, on the sustainable pavements, they talked about construction use and actual, the emissions from the construction equipment. On the maintenance and rehab, they actually confirmed the previous synthesis and said there's really more work that needs to be done in this area. Now, on the LCCA and the LCA especially, lifecycle assessment, it's still very controversial, and the guidelines that are in there are very generic. They had to work with, in pavements, you kind of have two major industries, the asphalt industry and the concrete industry. So they had both industries. They had federal highway. They had states. They had all these people involved. And so the LCA, some of the states are saying it doesn't have enough directive, guidelines, but LCA itself is just so new that this is a good start. This is where we need to start. So it's a little PC area. I'll leave it at that. This was something that I thought was interesting. This was in the chapter 10 on the future and the environmental product relations. And I recently just saw this in another presentation that someone was giving in an asphalt arena where they talked about UTC codes for materials in the future. And this is a concrete mix design and the environmental impacts for a concrete mix design. And you're looking at the global warming, you're looking at ozone, you're looking at the whole environmental things. Now, as a materials person, I was a little bit concerned that they had 2 lines for performance metrics and over half a dozen lines of details and metrics for the environmental issues. But this was just a snapshot. If you look at the full document, they do have the complete performance metrics too, along with some more environmental impacts. Now, I'm going to cover some examples. This is kind of like concepts according to Georgene, and I'll do this a little bit quick. First, I think education and people coming up with new things, that's sustainable. And that kind of, the corollary is down there on the bottom, mandating specifics, I think it's detrimental. You really need to provide people options. When you start, I know sometimes you got to mandate things to get things done, but if you mandate options instead of just mandating one way, that's a better way to think about it. We talked about how it can take time for sustainable, and then the context nature. So when I took over the materials lab in 2000, we had already had a standard on the book that said that you could use recycled concrete to be replacement for virgin gray layer face. But I couldn't tell where anybody had done it. And so I actually saw a presentation somewhere else where a recycler was showing how to do it. You can't just recycle and throw it back in. You've got to process it. You've got to handle it correctly. There's steps that have to be taken. And so I invited that recycler to come to our annual contractors meeting. And just to kind of see if they would listen, I guess. And they did. Boy, did they listen. The recycling increased that next year, and then it was up to 400,000 tons. And now we're at about 100,000 tons a year, which is about 10%. And for an aggregate-rich state like Georgia, 10% is pretty good. We have lots of aggregate, lots of good aggregate. We're taking a bite of that pie, and it was just based on education. Sometimes if you provide the contractors options, they'll come up with it on their own. On Interstate 16, they're out there right now recycling 100% of the concrete back into the shoulder pavement. And we've never done that before in Georgia on an interstate. Now, the contractor already had options for the shoulders. And so they came in and requested this as another option. And we had the experience already with the concrete recycling on GAB. And from what I understand, the project is going great. I'm actually going out there to see them next week to kind of get a visit of it. Let's talk a little bit about time on sustainability. In 1981, I was doing some research on old interstates and found out that we actually put RAP in an interstate pavement back in 1981. I graduated high school in 1981. I mean, and I just retired. That's a long time ago. We've been doing RAP a long time. And then we had a standard specification in 93. So another 20 years, just in 2012, because what's happened is when we started out, we were at 10 and 15% RAP. And that was okay. But now, as things are getting tighter and asphalt got more expensive, contractors wanted to put 20%, 25, 30%. The same thought pattern that we had on the 10-15 didn't work on that 25 and 30% RAP. And so we had to tweak those requirements. We were finding pavements that were cracking up within 4 years. We expect a minimum 10 years for our resurfacing. They were cracking up where we were having to resurface in 4 years. And so you gotta, I don't know if it'll ever be sustainable. You gotta continually, you're never gonna reach sustainability. You gotta continually look at it and make changes to make sure it's sustainable. Now, no money doesn't have anything to do with sustainability. It's actually a negative part, but that's what causes to start using micromilling. And this is more of a context thing. Georgia, conventionally, on our high volume interstates, we had a special mix called SMA, stone matrix asphalt, and then a thin mix on top of that. And in the past, we would just mill off both of those and replace both of them. And we got to saying, hey, we need to find a way to save some money. And with a conventional milling head, we weren't going to be able to just take off that top mix. So we worked with the manufacturers and came up with this micro mill milling head that'll just take off the surface mix. So we're reusing that SMA for another time. But if we're required on this project to check a box to get recycling, we won't be able to do that because it doesn't use any recycled material. We don't allow recycling in that top 1 inch because it's just too thin to be able to use recycling. So that's the problem of if you mandate something that you say, mandate this has to be recycled, that can cause you problems. And then this process wouldn't work. Crumb rubber, that's ground tires. And this is another kind of a mandate thing. And that picture, pretend that mud is actually asphalt because that's what happened. When I took over the materials job in 2000, my predecessor had left me the picture from the newspaper where cars had been stuck in the asphalt because of a crumb rubber project. And so we had a really bad experience. I couldn't find the actual picture, so I got close. But the picture itself is seared in the heads, of the people that went through it. And so sometimes when you mandate things and they go bad, it makes it even worse. But in 2007, we had problems with polymers in our asphalt. That the prices were going crazy out in the roof. And we use polymers in a high volume. Makes polymers better than just regular asphalt. And so we looked at it again. This was another contractor that came to us and says, hey, we want to use this option because it'll save, the polymers are so expensive, this will save money. And so we placed Georgia DOT placed over 500,000 tons since then. Now, we're not just assuming that it's going to work and that it's going to be the same as polymer. We're doing testing. We've got research that's ongoing that's looking at those original projects just to make sure that our assumptions that it is good are good assumptions. You don't want to find out after you have all these roads paved that they only last 4 years. You've got to make sure that they're going to be sustainable. And another thing about the crumb rubber is you got to look at the details. I've heard some states say, oh, you know, chrome rubber is better than what we use. It's much better, chrome rubber asphalt. Well, they're comparing it to regular neat asphalt. If you're comparing it to a polymer, it's a little closer comparison. So you got to look at the performance and the materials of what you're looking at to say if something is better or if it's cheaper or not. All right, I said I would take you back to reality, and this is kind of my request as a materials practitioner and former DOT person. This is what the materials folks need. We need those vetted guidelines related to the environmental issues. And we need to get all those people together to make those decisions. And those are the hard decisions. But, you know, you can't leave the materials person to be the sustainable, you know, guru. They need the help. They need some input. But listen to them, too. And then options to fit the situation. I think it's always better to have options than to mandate something one way. Especially, sometimes the industries want to get it mandated a certain way. The different industries have been known to go to the legislature and get laws made that mandate something a certain way. And so that usually doesn't turn out good. And then trust them to make the right decisions once they have all the information and the input. And thank you.
Thank you, Georgene. And so our next speaker, and I'll introduce him as he's getting set up. Our next speaker is Dr. Gerardo Flintsch, who is a professor in the VIA Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at Virginia Tech and directs the Center for Sustainable Transportation at the Virginia Tech Transportation Institute. Professor Flintsch, his research interests are in the fields of asset management and pavement engineering. He is currently the chair of the TRB subcommittee on sustainable pavements and vice chair of the Committee on Managing Road Assets of the World Road Association. He is also organizing the 9th International Conference on Managing Pavement Assets. And I will now turn it over to him.
Okay. Thank you. And good afternoon, everyone. I've been talking about a topic that I've been working for a few years, asset management, and looking at it as the perspective of how we use asset management for enhancing the ability of our transportation infrastructure. To do that, I came up with a quick outline of this. I will spend a few minutes talking about some basic concepts from asset management to performance management to state of good repair. All things very well related to each other, but very important to make good decisions. And that brings us to decision making. And when we start to look at decisions from a sustainability point of view, we need to look at those decisions considering many criteria. And of course, one way would be to put all that in the same unit as we were talking just before the break, but also we can use other tools that allow us to balance these different criteria with different units and different ways of doing that. And then I will just, within this framework, I will cover 3 examples of how we put these things into practice, from a network level type of tool to incorporate environmental aspects into decision making for pavement management, a little bit more strategic level cross-asset tools, and maybe looking at more sustainable solutions at the project level. And again, this will be some work for some of our students that have been kind of graduated in the last few years, and then just to illustrate how we can try to use asset management concept to make more sustainable decisions at all the levels of this, and then some couple of conclusions. So just to start is, well, why do we manage our infrastructure assets? And one of the things, of course, is we want to preserve the value of our investment. Our assets are a key part of our portfolio of investment as a highway agency, as a Department of Transportation. We need to preserve that value through good asset management practices. We also want to come up with plans to preserve and renew those assets in a way that allow us to use the resources that usually are scarce in the best possible way. And the idea with that is provide the users the level of service that they need or they want or they aspire, and therefore provide what we call a state repair. So you have there a few concepts that I mentioned. And as you see, every few years there's an evaluation of this. What happened here? An evaluation of our infrastructure, and then again, this may be a little bit biased because it's high focus on us civil engineers evaluating the infrastructure. But overall, it shows that if you look at both the level of capacity, the condition, the funding needs, the future, resilience, safety, etc., we haven't done a very good job. Our infrastructure is barely passing grade, and there's a big deficit there in the backlog that we need to do. And in particular, if we focus on road, we only get a grade of D. That I would argue probably that's not the best we can do. So we need to do better. And one way to do better is to use asset management. And for this, I borrow a slide for Peter Stefanos. He came talk at a conference we hosted here back, and then took this directly from the MAP 21, the appropriation law for the transportation budget. It says the asset management is a strategic and systematic process operating, maintaining, and improving physical assets in considering both engineering and economical aspects. And you see here we don't have the environmental aspect there too. And then we talk about inventory, condition, risk, strategies, etc. that came into the program that Federal Highway developed every 4 years is certified and so on. There's another piece that I added from also the MAP 21 legislation that says that this asset management, really what we want to do is to identify a structured sequence of maintenance and rehabilitation, etc., to achieve and sustain at the site level of service that provides a state of good repair. That's at the minimum practical cost. So we have the three aspects. We have the service, we have state of good repair, we want to do that at the minimum cost. And for that, I've been using over the years a scheme that says, well, of course, the heart, the base, the foundation of all the asset management system is a database where I know what I have, I need an inventory, I know the condition of those assets, I know how much they're used, and I also know what we need to do with them. And based on that, I will use that foundation to support a series of decisions of business process that go basically at three levels. On the strategic level, what I set as performance targets that we talk about first thing in the morning. And of course, that has to be associated with a budget. If I set very high standards, I will need more money. That if I have lower standards, I will need less money. So I need to balance those two trade-offs and so on. And then I will need to go and they make decisions of what I do with my assets at the network level. And at this time, typically I have systems to handle my payments, my bridges, my signs, etc. Series of individual engineering management systems that hopefully, if my asset management is mature enough, will be integrating into the integrated decision-making process that consider both performance and cost. And I would argue we also need to start incorporating sustainability into those decisions. Well, environmental aspects that will make our decision more sustainable. And then, of course, once you get a work plan with all these asset management network level tools that allow us to predict the condition, optimize our investment, and so on, came up with a work program. I need to go and design each of these treatments, each of these projects I have in the work program to be able to execute them. And of course, I need to monitor the performance, I provide some feedback, but also links with the strategic goals and help us figure out how close we are to achieving those goals. And what I would argue is when we are making decisions at all these three levels, from the project level to the network level to the strategic level, and again, we go from there from very technical decisions to very high-level planning decisions with the whole spectrum of decisions in between, we will have economic, social, and environmental impact. So truly, we are affecting the sustainability of our system by making these decisions. And going back to the presentation that Pete gave at the Payment Evaluation Conference, really a key part of this is the performance management. And we already talked about that. It's a requirement of MAP 21 that transform the federal program, provide means of most efficient investment. Figure out how we can choose the right investment to help us achieve our performance goals, what we want to achieve. And again, this performance could be a very wide range of performance measures. And help refocus the national priority, increase accountability and transparency, and improve project decision making. Again, and we've used some of these for years. Every year, or every couple of years now, there's a report published on the condition of the highways. And of course, there you have the condition of the payments that typically we call the performance of our payments. We consider in the International Roughness Index that correlates very well with the perception we have when we ride on that payment, but also impacts rolling resistance for gas use and emissions and all those things. So this has been used for a while now as a network level, as a system level indication but also to compare the conditions of the road in the various states, and you have green, yellow, and red for each state there. You can't read it, but that's probably okay. You can get that from the website. And of course, we also have other measurements, for example, the accidents. And I would argue that probably the social aspect of sustainability, the main factor we can affect from the highway perspective is the amount of people who die or get injured in the road, and that have a big impact on the society. Therefore, accident rates, accident number of accidents, etc., could be a measure of the social impact of our investments in highway transport and improvements, preservation, rehabilitation. That's at the national level. And then most states at this point have also some performance measures that they share with the user at the state level. And Virginia has a dashboard that goes all the way from road conditions to project delivery and many different performance that they also publish in a quarterly report that is posted on the website and so on. So we have a series of goals that are somehow translated into something we can measure, and those measures are the ones we use to track our performance, how well we're doing in making our investments. Of course, that brings us to the last concept there, the state of good repair. And I was struggling to find a definition, and then I found this, and I kind of adapted a little bit. The state that results from application of transportation asset management concept. We need to balance these economic and performance aspects in which an agency maintains physical assets according to a policy that minimizes asset life cycle costs while avoiding negative impacts to service. Again, I would argue probably we need an environmental component there too. And of course, it's hard to define by itself, but easy to define what is not a state of good repair. And if you believe an ASCE report, most of our infrastructure in a state that is not in good repair in a way. So the common themes: achieving and meeting certain levels of service, of performance for the user, performing maintenance, repair, rehabilitation according to the policies that we set, so I help us achieve our performance objectives, and reducing or eliminating a backlog of unmet capital needs. The 3.6 trillion that the ASCE may be too high, but it's in the order of magnitude, so we have a big backlog in our infrastructure in general. And of course, that's what we try to do with asset management. So I would argue all these three concepts, they all work together to help us align our decisions with our performance measures and performance objectives. So, well, we need to make decisions, and you have a little cartoon there. You may have seen that before. And we do a little bit better, but in many cases, not much better than that when we make our decisions, because so our traditional goals, over the years, we focus on two things. We focus on minimizing cost because we don't have a lot of resources, and also on maximizing the benefit. And that benefit you can measure in many different units, but very commonly, at least from the pay management perspective, that's my background, is better payment performance, better IRI for our network and so on. So those are the two objectives. If you look at it from a broader sustainability, and we've been talking about that for all day, then we need to incorporate maybe some other aspects. What about environmental impact? What about the safety, the social impacts of the amount of people who die in the roads and all that? How we account So how we can minimize costs, maximize benefits, minimize environmental impacts, and minimize the amount of people who die in the road? Well, we need to figure a way to get tools to do that. And of course, if you look at the legislation, you see that at the federal level, MAP 21 clearly established a series of different measurements, different goals, that can be translated into measures that had to account for all of these. Because it's not just safety and condition, congestion, system reliability, environmental sustainability, et cetera, et cetera. Some of these are easy to translate into measures than others, but we need to account for those. And of course, this has to reflect the triple bottom line that we talk about. We need to provide economic development, so we met our economic needs for now and the future by taking good care of our environment and by doing that in an equitable way so everybody benefits from those things. Now, equity between different groups of our population, but also with future generations. And of course, to be sustainable, you have to be there. So to be doing that, the Department of Transportation has established a series of goals that are aligned with the 3 or 4 programs that you have listed there. Of course, the most probably, the ones that we're most familiar with are the ones here. We have for years control for the national highway system at a minimum, get the condition of the pavement and bridges and the performance, and in terms of IRI and so on for both the interstate and non-interstate. The main difference why they're separate is because, of course, we have a little bit higher standards for the interstate. Usually, most states would have higher standards for the interstate than some of the other roads in the national highway system. And then, of course, we want to have some safety goals, and AASHTO has set as main objective to reduce the number of fatalities in roads towards zero death. It's one of the things that's been adopted. So we want to account for actions there. For congestion and emissions, a big deal. Again, that's the environmental aspect mostly, and then, of course, train movement interstate. And I think that's where at least as far as I can tell, is the hardest time has been finding the right measures in there, how we do that, and the relationship between the highway investments and the impact on the freight. So to be able to balance all these, because truly what we need to do is find a series of investment that will allow us to improve in all these measurements. We need to rely on some tools, and there's many tools that are available, but there's a family of tools that deal with multiple criteria decision making, and those go from multi-objective optimization, or multi-objective decision making, where you have conflicting objectives. Of course, if you want to maximize cost and minimize cost and maximize performance, you cannot do both. You have to balance them in a way that is the most appropriate way. So that's one way. And then you also more looking at maybe projects and comparing projects. There are other types of tools that are within this family of multi-attribute decision making that, again, they usually the utility theory and et cetera, decision analysis and so on. So there's tools, and in particular, I'm going to focus just on one to illustrate this. If you look at optimization, of course, it's a decision-making tool that selects the best combination of treatments, say where do we need to act, what type of facilities, with bridges, with payments we need to fix, what type of treatment we need to apply to those, and when is the optimal time. So, and I can set that to achieve a specific objective. For that, I have operation techniques, operation research techniques I can use. And again, the main part there is I need to figure out a realistic decision-making process and come up with the mathematical models that allow us to model that. And of course, that implies that if you really want to achieve sustainable transportation, I need to consider multiple objectives that reflect these 3 legs of the sustainability concept, of the bottom line: economic development, ecological sustainability, and social desirability, that I would call this high-level performance that I can then reflect in objectives, and I can come up with ways of measuring that. And I will have to do some trade-off. And usually what happens is there's not going to be one solution that's better. What they have is that we have a family of solutions that, from an operations research terminology, is called a Pareto set of solutions that satisfies the constraints and give me a good balance between the different objectives. If we go back to the 2 objectives we've been using traditionally in payment and bridge management, for example, that is maximizing the benefits or minimizing the cost. Of course, if you're here, the optimal solution would be one that is on the top the left side on this. We have the maximum benefits and no cost. Unfortunately, that's not something we can accomplish. But if we do different strategies, we're going to have different costs to implement those strategies, and those strategies will give us some specific benefits. And there will be a group of those strategies that following what we call this efficiency frontier, and those are strategies that are somehow optimal. And if you compare a strategy 2 and a strategy 1, you see a strategy 2 will always be better than 1 because it costs less and it gives us more benefits. But if you compare a strategy 2 and 6, it's harder to tell because 6 gives us more benefit and it costs more. So again, all these solutions that fall in that frontier provides a kind of an optimal balance between the two, depending on how much weight will give to benefit or cost will be the one that we're going to select. And in payment management, for many years, we've used this concept of incremental benefit cost to do a approximate optimization for our investment. Most of the payment management systems that we have right now, and a lot of the bridge management systems, to use this concept. It's an easy way to figure out, okay, depending on the budget I have, I know which strategy I can choose. That will give me the optimal benefit for that level of investment. So that brings us to, okay, how do we apply that? So in this, again, I choose 3 examples. The first one is a network level example. And if you look at that plot I shall show you, Filippo did his PhD looking at, okay, how do we add environmental considerations to this decision-making process? How he called it eco-efficiency values in a more comprehensive decision support. So now instead of the 2 traditional indicators, cost and benefit, or I call it performance there, what about if we add the environment there and then use a similar approach, a multi-attribute optimization, to come up with the ultimate strategy? So we said, well, if we use cost as an indicator of the economic development, I would say maybe performance is a quality of level of service that affects the social aspects of these, and then I will add environmental aspects as the third dimensions, and the way we try to balance. And they said, well, for the environmental aspect, what he did is he did a simplified life cycle analysis where he only considered greenhouse gas emissions. You get the various steps in the life cycle of the payment, including the use phase, to develop a carbon footprint tool, very simple tool that we use to assess the performance. So then you can check your different alternatives where each time you do some project, and one of the things we did in his case, well, we were going to consider, the use phase, but we didn't. We incorporated in the next example I will show you later at the project level. So he did this, and of course, each time you have some construction, there will be some emissions that will be generated, so you can minimize the emissions. So what he looked at is now instead of having a 2-dimensional plot of this where you have 2 things, you have 3 parameters we want to consider, and we have an ideal solution here that has no cost, or has the minimum cost, the minimum environmental impact, and infinite performance. And just to make it representable in an easy way, he used the inverse of the performance to plot it. But again, the idea is then now instead of having a curve that will give us the Pareto solutions, in this case we have a surface of solutions that are all optimal in a sense. We cannot improve one of the performance parameters without hurting the others. And then what we need to do is we measure some type of distance between this surface to this point by weighting the different parameters, and that will give us the optimal solutions. And you can set this weight at the priori or a posteriori. There are different ways of doing that. But that's just one example. And of course, you could add these more objectives, and then you cannot represent it graphically, but you can still use the same concept of efficiency frontier in different elements. Another thing we've been looking at, this is more at the strategic level, say, well, what about now if I need to allocate resources between my different components of my infrastructure? So we focus on different apps, but to start with, we say, well, what about we have payments and bridges, and we have the conditions of those. Of course, based on our interventions of our investment, it will impact those conditions. will have consequences, and then that will impact my system performance. So we said we did a case study, and there were some master students that the work in this was used by another, by Mohammed as part of his PhD later on. But the idea is you can rate each of the individual's assets based on the various parameters that will be related with functionality, condition, sustainability, etc. Then you can aggregate those indicators at the corridor and at the higher level. And for example, just to say, we will look at the database in IT1 in Virginia, and we say, well, we select 50-mile long segments, just to illustrate this. So, well, what data we have for payments? We have IRI, routing, and cracking. For bridges, we have the element value. And based on that, we could figure out the structure and function condition of those two by weighting these different elements and came up with some type of indicator that then we can combine into a payment health index that then we'll integrate it into a corridor health index and we balance it. And then what he did was, what Mohammed did, using this information, said, well, what about now if I look at a very simplified, this very simplified network, and we have little segments of corridor in a way, and look at the distribution of how much I invest in payments and bridges and how that impacts my system, my indicators that I have here for payments and bridges and then the overall corridor. And based on that, you can figure out an optimal allocation that will give you a good balance between the two. And that gave us about 75% investment in payments and 25% in bridges. Again, this is just consider the two aspects, the functionality and the condition. You can, the structural condition, you can use other parameters may achieve these. And then, of course, the risk of maybe losing a bridge would be much higher, so we may weight it differently because of that. And then he went ahead and said, well, if we make this more general, and I look at the road conditions, and well, if the road conditions bad, will affect my capacity and failure of collapse. That will create traffic detours, will reduce my network efficiency, increase my travel time. So I can use those parameters to see how the network performance and the vulnerability of that network, and we define vulnerability as just how far the performance moves from the one where the network is not disrupted, and look at that, what would be the impact of my decisions on these various network measurements that you have there. Again, to straight more strategic level. Finally, the last example is much more down to earth. We had another student that had been looking about, well, how I do this at the project level. How do I balance performance, cost, and environmental impact at the project level? So we've been looking at a project we contracted a few years back in Virginia where we compared different recycling techniques. Call-in-place recycling, full depth reclamation, and call center employee recycling in one project. Actually, it's one of the examples ASE has chosen to illustrate the good practices in the sustainability aspect in the rating system. But the idea is that we compare a lifecycle cost analysis. Joao Santos has been working on this. It's a dual PhD student from the University of Coimbra and Virginia Tech. And say, well, you look at here, we compare three things. We compare a recycling-based rehabilitation, traditional rehabilitation is the reconstruction, and corrective maintenance. What happened is in that segment of IT1, VIDA has to rehabilitate it almost every 3 or 4 years because the structural condition was gone. So they kept it going by doing milling overlays, but that wasn't very cost effective. And that clearly shows in here that that's the less cost effective option. And with the recycling, the life cycle of that over 50 years was reduced to about half of what it was originally. And it was significantly about 20% lower than what you get with the traditional rehabilitation. So it was a cost-effective alternative, and also produced, and again, I apologize, in this case, the environmental impacts are in a lower scale, so it's a little bit hard to read, but there were significant savings in materials. In all cases, the recycling was most effective in terms of environmental impact. This is in the just equivalent CO2 for greenhouse gas emissions, but we did this for different indicators. Significant reduction in transportation because we don't take the materials out and in, and then also significant impact on the use phase, and that's where we incorporated Again, the better condition of the road translates into significant reduction of gas consumption of the vehicles driving on that road, and that's the most significant impact of road investment, is how much emissions in gas you save because the roads are in good condition. Look at there, it's a log scale, but it's significantly higher. That's why we need to do it in that way to show that. Just to illustrate three of the ways you can do that. So just to conclude, asset management, again, it's a key function for most highway agencies that have adopted this concept. It helps align our preservation and renewal programs and budgets that are with the user expectations. And of course, align it with the performance goals that we set for our system, for our network, for our programs. And of course, sound asset management, therefore, are needed to provide a sustainable highway infrastructure systems. And I think that's all I have. Thank you.
We do not have questions online yet.
Okay, so who has a question from the audience here? We have about 15 minutes for some good discussion questions for both Georgene and Gerardo. So any thoughts on asset management, pavement, sustainability?
Oh, someone. And I have one too. I'll turn off.
Quick question for Georgene. In your chart about the recycled concrete content, why did it plummet after it was introduced?
So I didn't get a chance to explain that, but it actually didn't plummet. There was a really high peak. We had some major concrete rehab projects coming up right before they started doing this recycling. And so that was really kind of a blip. And in the total tonnage of materials we used, too, kind of went up in those years. And then, around that time was when the economy tanked, and that was the tank.
I think the microphone is off.
Gerardo, wonderful presentation. When you get into the multi-criteria analysis, I noticed you picked carbon dioxide as one of the factors. And the problem I've always had with multi-criteria analysis is everybody seems to forget that we arbitrarily picked a weighting factor, which tends to drive everything else. These are often the same people that are squeamish about just picking a dollar value because they can't get a precise one. And I wonder if you have a few thoughts on that. My own observation was, since we have dollar equivalent numbers by year for carbon dioxide anyway, could it be an easier analysis to do and explain if we could try to go directly to the dollar valuations instead of the weighting criteria?
And that's a very good point, and that's one of the questions that always come up when we have this discussion. A few years back, we had a workshop we hosted that we got people from Europe and the U.S. to talk about sustainable payment, and that was a big discussion that came out. Why don't we make this a uniform unit in dollars? And some of the more purist folks that they deal with life cycle assessment and all that, they really don't like that concept. And again, it's a practical way of doing that, and so it's a different way. And again, you are doing it anyway because somehow you need to weigh those. And an option would be maybe to translate what we do often in life cycle cost analysis, for example, is we look at the user cost from the agency, the user cost for the users, and then we give a little less weight to the users because this is not a direct cost. Maybe something similar we could do. But I agree, maybe the way of doing it is bringing everything to a common scale so then we don't have to worry about this. This is another way of looking at that if you don't want to use that. But yeah, that's a discussion that comes every single time. And I don't know which one is better, and I don't have a big feeling for it in a way. I know the World Bank, for example, that when in the HDM4 model, they do get emissions that translated into dollars, and they put it as part of this in the same unit. So at least, and that's very commonly used in developing countries for assessed projects. So
perhaps we could talk a little more later, but Another approach that I've used actually, is to establish a range of valuations and then use Monte Carlo, concatenation of the functions to get at least a rough value. And then say, well, the minimum is this, the maximum is probably that, and the most likely is probably this, and fine. Fit a distribution to it, run the numbers, and see if it makes a difference. And if it doesn't, then that's close enough.
And that's actually what we did for these, because just to make them all within the same range, because otherwise the weight doesn't have any meaning. Because if you have a scale from 1 to 1,000, the other scale to 1 to 10, the weight. So we did use the minimum and maximum and scale everything with that. So then we have kind of a range, and so the weight really weights the actual criteria and not the units you're using for measuring.
Yeah, so I'm thinking that this asset management approach will eventually show the way for the whole triple bottom line valuation stuff, because it's really the same problem. It's just that you're starting with existing assets.
Yeah.
Yeah, I enjoyed your presentation, Gerardo. I just wanted to share something, though, that I'm hoping doesn't come across as a shameless plug, because that's not the intent. It really is, the idea is really to just kind of support and sort of reiterate the importance of both asset management and payments to and their connections to sustainability, and their really strong relationships. We at Federal Highway, we have a sustainability working group that consists of members of different program areas within the agency, and that working group and the Office of Natural Environment recently released a report which represents a first attempt at Federal Highway to kind of synthesize a number of different sustainability-related activities within the agency, because there are a lot of offices that are doing some really good things. And in that report, there are some areas that are identified specifically as action areas, because they are where we kind of see where the action is going forward for sustainability. And two of those are asset management and in particular asset management and planning and how they relate to sustainability. And the other one is sustainable pavement. And we had some input on the guidance that you talked about earlier. And so just to kind of say that, these are really two strong areas when it comes to sustainability. And I only have one copy of the report with me, but if others are interested in, you can have this one, or I can make sure that you get some if they're interested in that.
Available online?
It is available on the Sustainable Highways Initiative website as well.
Okay, that sounds like a cool report. Whoops. Yeah, I think I'm on. So I also have a question about the durability of the using recycled aggregate, using with these different processes. I think there's some concerns about will it last as long? Will it be as long? And after either you quote to that, and I'm hoping, Georgene or Gerardo.
Yes, that is. I mean, you can see we've been using recycled asphalt pavement wrap in our asphalt pavements for many years, 30-some years, and there's still things that we're finding that, when you increase the amount of wrap and you consider that wrap is still contributing all of that liquid, what's not, and people are starting to realize that and starting to have to rethink of some of the things that you thought about.
I would think it's another optimization problem, right? It's like what's the optimal amount of recycled asphalt you can use in a pavement?
Or in different ways and different additives you can use to use more. So it's continually evolving.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And truly, in our case in Virginia, we don't have too much experience with recycling. We look at other states. Nevada's been using it for years, and they save a lot of money because of it. And so they've proven that in some conditions, their recycling, in situ recycling treatment work as well as the traditional rehabilitation. What we are doing is, in that particular project, as well as another 5 or 6 projects we built throughout the state, we've been following those, and then we will continue to follow. I have some data for the IT1 project shows that so far it's working very well, but it's only 4 years, so it would be terrible if it wasn't working very well. But at least they didn't have any problems so far, so everything seems to indicate that it will provide good performance. But it's early to say. We've done a lot of the for FWD testing, and we showed that the structural capacity of the layers is actually improving with time, and that's a very common thing for the recycling materials. The way we treat them, they keep gaining in strength with time. So far in 4 years, still improving. Eventually, it will start to degrade and it will start to go back. But that's another good indication saying that at least there's a good chance that it will work well in the long term. And again, there's a lot of experience in other countries, in other states that show that they do work quite well. It doesn't work in all conditions. You have to select this and the right application for the right problem you have, of course. But what we're trying to do is try to see that can be incorporated as another tool in the toolbox of in the pain management toolbox, another rehabilitation strategy. And seems to be quite a bit of agreement. What we've run a little bit into is some of the more traditional industry are not too happy with seeing too much recycling because it means they have to reinvent themselves a little bit. So that's been the main obstacle we found in the state is trying to break down business model that used to meet and replace the surface of the pavement. I guess probably that's a very common problem everywhere.
Yeah, I actually have a quick question. You both addressed a lot of about recycling materials or reducing the need to replace as much as possible. But I noticed, at least in some of the pictures, some of the equipment to recycle looks very expensive and unwieldy and uncommon to find or have produced. I'm curious if any of that was factored into the cost, because to build brand new roads, there's equipment readily available for that all over the place, but to do these complex operations, yeah, that's kind of the image that's burned into my mind.
Yeah, and it's an issue, and some of these recyclers, they had to be brought from New York because we didn't have any in the States, and there's not enough. But again, it's a matter of promoting that, reinventing it, and that's been the main problem why we're not doing it as much as we should, because there's many places where we should be doing these things. But it's not happening because it does require quite a big of an investment, and I think it needs some long-term vision in a way that clear. So we want to do this, and again, Nevada did it, and there's plenty of equipment in that part of the country, but other areas there's less. And I know that the North Atlantic area, they do much more, so there are more companies that have this piece of equipment. But yeah, that's something that has to be built. I don't know if you want to add something.
I just wanted to add that I think that also points out the importance of not, mandating something specifically or providing options. Because, if New York uses it but Florida doesn't, if you say Florida, you have to use that, they got to, that equipment has to get down there. So you've got to have some options.
And again, in this particular project, it was very convenient, and it was chosen on purpose because it was very, the tools were very easy to do, and the way there was also a very ingenious way of doing it, because what they did is they kept the trucks on the interstate and they sent the trucks through an alternative route. So that saved a lot of the duration, because if you send all the trucks to the local roads, then you create another problem because you destroy those when you're reconstructing this. And it took a few days only. It was much faster than having to remove all the materials and reconstruct your pavement. They would have required another lane because there was no way they could do all that. But again, this particular project has a lot of benefit because it was chosen just to demonstrate that this can be done and it could be cost effective. And it could have won some awards and all that. But again, yeah, I agree with you. You have to be, and again, the good thing to show we found is that, and somebody said this earlier, not necessarily to do it more sustainable from an environmental point of view, it has to be more expensive. You can find solutions that are cheaper and less negative for the environment if you use, but may require some innovations, and this is one of them. The construction industry will need to reinvent themselves in a way.
And this is Gary McCoy again. I just wanted to comment on the institutional problems, which is why we often get back to framing these things in terms of institutional questions. And the power of the kind of analysis that you're talking about enables you to do it. I was there as an operations director and said, okay, look, the laws of physics in New York are probably about the same as they are in Massachusetts and Pennsylvania. It works there. Let's use it here. Now, that said, you can't do it on a one-off basis because that'll prove that, gee, it's 10 times as expensive as doing it the normal way that we're already equipped to do. So you've got to say, here's a program of 40 projects which we're going to do using recycled asphalt so that the industry can make the investments that's required in this kind of equipment to give us the savings that we're trying to realize through adopting this new proven technology. But to do that within an institutional framework that works year to year, budget cycle to budget cycle, is difficult. And to be able to do that, you've got to have the analysis to prove that it's going to work. And that's where the research is coming. I guess that's not a question.
No, and on that great note, we are going to break for approximately 14 minutes. We'll resume at 2:15. If you have other thoughts and questions, jot them down. We'll have lots of time after the last two sessions to have a larger discussion. Thank you to Georgene and to Gerardo for that wonderful session.